Hello and welcome to another episode of our Building Thinking Classrooms video series. Today I have the pleasure of talking to Caleb Sinzinger, a 7th grade math teacher at Franklin Community Middle School in Franklin, Indiana. Hello, Caleb.
Hello, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Good, good. In this episode, we're going to explore the role of questioning and the role of the teacher while students are in small groups at their vertical surfaces. And our first clip sets up the task for the lesson so we know what the students are working on today. So let's take a look.
Today we are talking about unit conversions. We're going to be converting between different units of measurement. We are going to be doing this the exact same way that we have been practicing over the last, honestly, like the last 3 weeks, where we have set up a proportion where we have two different fractions that are equal, and then we are going to solve that by cross-multiplying. All right, so it is a little bit different though, because in the previous unit, we always had percentages, and those percentages always went over 100, so it was a bit more predictable. Now we're gonna have a little bit more variability in the way that we solve these problems. So if you take a look at number 1, this says how many inches are in 9.5 feet. First thing that we have to pay attention to when we see a problem like this is the units of measurement that we see. And what are the units of measurement that we see for number 1? Yeah?
Inches.
And? Feet, right? Inches and feet. Since we're going to set up a proportion, the first decision that we have to make is, are we going to put inches on top or feet on top? And the answer doesn't matter. So let's just put the first one that we see, let's put inches on top. So if we're going to say that we're going to put inches over feet, then both of our fractions in this proportion need to be oriented the same way. Now in this case, we have the number of feet, it's 9.5. So our first fraction is going to have the 9.5 on the bottom with feet. Since this says how many inches, we don't know how many inches, so what am I going to put above? X. Okay, when we do not know the value, we can put a variable, and so we can put X. Now we have one fraction, we need another fraction, and we are going to use the chart that is next to our board to find this. So there's a chart here. If you look around the room, there's a chart next to each board. But everybody for a second, look up at the big board for me.
I noticed in that clip that you did the instructions at one of the whiteboards. With the students all gathered around, of course. Is that a common practice? If so, why not just do it while they're at their seats?
Yeah, it's definitely a common practice. I've heard that studies show that we're more engaged, or students are more engaged when they're standing. Generally, if they're seated, they might be thinking they're going to receive information, but if they're standing, then they have more of a feeling that they're going to be taking part in the information that they're gathering. So just to try to be more engaging.
Yeah, I've talked about that receiving stance to a doing stance.
Yeah.
That mindset. I love that. You also had the conversion charts at each of the stations as well as on the screen in the front of the room. Did you find that helpful?
Yeah, I would say so. It was the first time that I've ever done it, but I think that in terms of life skills, being able to look at a chart and use it to apply to something, it seemed like a pretty applicable thing for outside of school. So even if they might be given certain conversions on questions in a test or anything like that, I figured it would be a good idea just for general life applicability.
Let's get into the student work now. Take a look.
Sounds good.
Well, yeah, you got
So it'd be 4 cups and a fork.
How do you get 4 cups and a fork?
Because this is 2 pints and you multiply these 2 cups. So you multiply these.
Yeah, here, I want you to come. You two come look at this. Ryder, explain that again.
So if it takes 2 pints to do 1, have 1 quart, and it takes 2 cups for 1 pint. Then you gotta multiply these, and you get 4 cups in a quart.
4 cups in a quart. So what's our other fraction?
Mine.
There is 4. Let's show them like that.
5,280 feet.
Sounds like we're doing well here. Okay, so let's take a look at this. First, let's look over here. This is 12.3. 12.3 is kilometers, so are we good there with kilometers on bottom? Yeah. Now you have 1,000 right here. We go back over to our chart where we're talking about distance. We have 1 kilometer, 1,000 meters. So you have kilometers over meters. Good. Excuse me.
That's confusing.
What 2 units is this? What 2 units is this question asking about?
Miles and feet.
Miles and feet.
So there ain't no way there's feet.
1 mile.
Oh, just Kinsley?
Well, I was trying to figure out, but I'm confused too.
Okay.
It says how many meters are in 12.3 kilometers?
Kilometers, yeah. So I want every single time, I want you guys to write down something like this, so that you are telling yourself, I want this unit on top, this one on bottom. Since we're talking about meters and kilometers, which one do you want on top?
Meters.
Meters, sure, it doesn't matter. So then just go ahead and write M over KM. M over KM. And I want you to see if you can set it up. You want meters on top of both, you want kilometers on bottom of both. Okay? You got this.
I'm really glad we started with these clips because they illustrate my favorite strategy, and that is walking away. I love that one. You did give a few hints or scaffolding reminders about the process as you went around, but in these clips and throughout the time I was in your classroom, you knew the perfect time to turn and walk away from the group. How do you decide when to do that?
I was thinking about this, and I think it's kind of like pushing a stone down a hill. You have to work at first, and then you eventually reach a point where the stone's momentum is what's carrying it, and you don't need to keep going. And so it's kind of trying to find the balance of when do the students have the amount of information that they need in order to be working independently. So it changes from group to group. You have to know your students to try to know when that moment happens, I guess.
I love that analogy of pushing a stone down a hill, because I've heard about pushing a rock up a hill.
Yeah.
I'm totally going to steal that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm totally stealing that. Something else I definitely wanted our audience to notice is that each time you walked away, the students went right back to work. They didn't miss a beat. No one was saying, hey, wait, where are you going?
Right.
Or anything like that. How did you develop that stick-to-itiveness in them? Because I suspect it wasn't always like that.
Yeah, I think non-curricular tasks were a huge help for me in that area. I think early on when I was starting BTC, there was a lot more of the pushback where kids would kind of they needed me to stand right next to them to be thinking through things. But this year I did a lot. Probably did 3 or 4 non-curricular tasks at the beginning of the year. And I think it set the tone for when we're in this classroom, we're thinking. It's okay to not have the answer. And we don't stop thinking, just because I think reinforcing that idea at the beginning has helped as we've gotten into more content.
I'm glad that you're sharing that connection between what you do at the beginning of the year to set everything up.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen. So, all right, let's take a look at our next segment.
Okay. Right? Okay. And then let's just work our way down. So we have meters, kilometers. Tell me why we have the X on top. Let's just work our way through. Explain why we have X on top.
Well, I only know that because you showed us, and that's how we're supposed to do it.
Okay, well then let's talk about why is 12.3 on bottom.
the kilometer.
Yeah, this says 12.3 kilometers, so 12.3 is going to go next to kilometers, right? And since this says how many meters, we don't know the number of meters, so X is going to go on top. Now you explain to me why we have 1 and 1,000.
No, we did it wrong.
What?
But I cannot find it.
Okay. We need to figure out how many meters are in 1 kilometer using our chart.
Yeah, so 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters.
Excellent.
So I put that So what do we put?
300.
Wait, put 1,000 on this on
300.
Okay, hold on. We're looking for process.
So kilometers. So I
You talk to your group. You got this. Talk to your group.
I think it's 12,000 meters. How many feet
I left that last few seconds on the video because you said you got this and walked away. But I could still see that you were kind of looking back, watching from the next group.
Yeah.
It's really hard to walk away sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah. I think especially for groups, there are some groups who lack confidence, and you don't want to put them in a position to where you hurt their confidence more by leaving them when they are not they're not able to put all the pieces together. So there are some groups where it's like, I think this group has got it. I'm going to give them what I think they need, and then I'm going to keep an eye on them. But then if I start to recognize a mistake that would cause them to do the whole thing incorrectly, then it makes more sense to jump back in, because I don't want them to get discouraged at the very end of the problem, thinking that they don't have any idea what's going on when they are really kind of 80 or 90% of the way there.
Yeah, there's a fine line between that struggle and frustration
Yeah,
that we walk.
definitely.
I loved the questioning you used with this group, asking them to explain what they had on the board. Why is it so important for them to come to the solution? It would be easy to just say, oh, you have this fraction backwards, or, oh, take a look at this one right here again.
Yeah.
And point out their mistake. That's
Right.
the easy out, I guess.
Yeah. I think the goal behind this whole approach is to give the responsibility for the kids' learning back to them. And if we can guide them to be the primary thinker in the problem solving, then they are practicing using those skills so that they can be independent thinkers in the future. If I just walk up and I point something out immediately, then they don't have to. I mean, really, self-assessment and problem solving is incredibly applicable to life, but we have to have the ability to look back and think critically. So giving them the opportunity and saying, hey, let's think about this spot, or tell me more about this, gives them a safe space to be able to do that.
You're right. That is an important life skill to be able to do that. All right, let's move on to another group.
All right. That's the same. I mean, it's the same thing. You need to find out how many ounces are in a pint. So you multiply up. 8 times 2 is 16. So we have 16. So then what I would do is I would write down 16 ounces equals 1 pint, right? And we're trying to figure out 420 ounces. Right? And now set up a fraction. Do you want pints over ounces or ounces over pints? It doesn't matter. Yeah. Let's go with pints over ounces, right? 1 over 16 equals x over 420. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, that's it.
I like this segment Caleb, because some teachers think that direct instruction has become kind of a bad word. And it's not. We just don't want that to be our only method of delivery, right? We don't want to live there. So how do you decide when a group needs some direct instruction? And I didn't see it in this lesson, but are there ever times when you need to just stop and bring the whole class together and say, you know, we need to regroup?
Yeah, I try to go based on confidence and ability per group. As you get to know the kids, and even just body language, you can start to kind of feel out when you might need to step in. If there's clearly a group who's just wandering in the dark, or they haven't even started the very first problem or something like that, then generally I might make the call to call them over. I've had 2 or 3 groups like that, and occasionally I'll pull 3 groups over to the same whiteboard to have a conversation. I think earlier on, when I was starting off, I would introduce something and then recognize that everybody was off, and that's when I would everybody or almost everybody, and that's when I would kind of say, hey, everybody meet me back over here, we're going to talk through this. But I think as I have grown and made some of those, I wouldn't call them mistakes, but been able to recognize where to make some corrections, I think that I've been able to avoid some of that preemptively. But yeah, it is definitely something that still happens from time to time.
Yeah, I imagine that it's much easier when they're at the whiteboards to see when everyone is struggling. I remember back in my own classroom, I might be walking around, and if 3 or 4 people struggled, I made the assumption that everyone was struggling, and then I brought everybody back to the board and did some more direct instruction, when quite possibly half the class didn't really need that. So I think that's another strength of using the vertical surfaces.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right, this next clip is good. I love it. It shows some really great thinking, so let's look at it.
All right.
So we put ounces at the bottom, right? So here, put this. So you want to put 8?
1,000.
Okay. You calculate that.
I heard that.
Times 376.
How old is that? Wait.
Play with this on let me go over it.
Hey, you know what?
Oh, I see what you did wrong. I see what you did wrong. Look. I see what you did wrong.
So LBS.
Ounce is supposed to go at the bottom.
Oh.
Yeah, so here. I see, yeah, you're supposed to write.
You just said
So put the cup, there's 1 cup, right? 8 ounces. 8 ounces. Wait, no.
You wrote your Z back.
Ounces go at the bottom, remember? Here. You're good. That was the rest.
No.
How you got 47?
Right here.
Okay. It's still the same though. Somehow.
Hold on, wait.
Casey, it's still gonna be the same answer.
Did something in the wrong spot.
I know something's in the wrong spot. Well, I'm not gonna take over again.
Wait,
So it's 1 cup. One. Ounces go at the bottom. So there's 47. See if that's it.
This is what I call the gold standard of what we want students to be doing in their group. Unpack this a little bit for us.
Yeah, I think one thing that is really important in life and in whenever you're doing a BTC style class is teamwork and also trust, respect. And I think that all of those things can work together to create a safe environment for mistakes and for perseverance. And I think that starting off with the non-curricular tasks where there isn't an end, and when you really start to hammer home the ideas of, I'm not necessarily going to answer some of these questions directly, I'm going to give you maybe a different way to look at things. It gives the students a space to try to problem solve when they might not have it fully or when they think they have it. And I think that as I have gone throughout the school year, one thing that I've really heavily emphasized is that the goal for all of us is to learn as individuals, but also to help the group. There are a lot of groups that are not going to be evenly, they're not going to be at even or level playing fields necessarily because they don't have the same prior knowledge coming in. And I've had conversations with a lot of kids about how the best form of mastery is being able to describe something or explain it to somebody else. So if they want to help themselves, they should be helping their group instead of doing what many kids do first, which is take the marker and do it for themselves, and then they're like, hey, my group finished, when really it's just one person who did. So I think all of those things kind of work together really nicely in that clip.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. It's time to end the task now and move into independent work time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look at how you accomplish that.
Okay. It was adjusted to let me. Okay, cool. Okay. Bring it in. You can walk in front of Mr. Harker.
Boys.
You can. Okay. Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit. So we had a couple of things that were they were very common mistakes or common confusions. The first thing that I emphasized, and I emphasize this to a lot of groups, is that what did I want you to start off by writing or putting on your board? Does anybody remember? Sophie?
Inches over feet and stuff.
Yeah, unit over unit. Figure out how you want your fractions to be oriented. What that was meant to replace, if you think back to the previous unit, was the x over 100. Having something that's always going to be fixed, that we can always rely on to use. This stuff that we are practicing right now is a very similar form factor to the stuff that we previously practiced, or at least that was the intention, but it adds a few variables that can sometimes get confusing. So starting off with something to, stop whatever's going on. Adding something concrete that we can stand on to help ourselves as we are navigating a problem that has a lot of different moving pieces is important. We are going to talk tomorrow about this again, and also maybe converting between multiple different units. But for right now, what I want us to practice when we go back to our seats, we're going to work on some mild, medium, and spicy. Do the stuff that you were confident in today so that tomorrow we have a good place to start, okay? Make sure that we're practicing. Ask questions as you have them, because I think that there are some of us that are still maybe a little bit lost on things. Right now, we want to fix those so that tomorrow we can come in confidently. Okay, go back to your seats. We're going to start some mild, medium, and spicy.
This was interesting for me because I've been in classrooms where the students really struggled with the task, and the consolidation became almost just more instruction time rather than consolidation. There wasn't much to consolidate because the students weren't quite, they didn't have enough to bring together. But you didn't do that here. It was pretty short.
Yeah, I've been recently. I've started to give questions on Google Forms that are they have response validation on. So in order to move on to the next question, they have to get the question correct. So as I start to see multiple groups at a specific question or progressing to a specific level, sometimes, and this is me thinking, this is not something that I've read anywhere, but I don't want to disrupt the momentum of, if the kids have it, if I stop and re-explain it, it could be kind of redundant for something that they've already realized. So jumping right into some of the individual practice, I think has helped a lot of the kids who typically struggle with independent work because their attention span from listening or working to individual practice, sometimes they get distracted, or they are somewhere
Well, they're
else.
middle
So,
schoolers.
yes, yeah. Yeah, I think it's helped with that transition.
Good. And speaking of consolidation, if you had to boil it down, if we were going to summarize, what is the role of the teacher while the students are at those small groups at the vertical surfaces? And then part of that role is, and you've talked about it, the questioning. So can you kind of boil that down for us?
Yeah, I think, well, questioning helps the kids take ownership of their learning. And I think I have another analogy. I like to think in analogies. And if my goal were to help students be really good at bowling, I would help them with and critique some of their technique. One thing that's really tempting as teachers, and I've done this myself, is where you go up to a group or you go up to an individual who's struggling and you say, here, let me see your pencil. And then you do the problem for them. You say, see that? Does that make sense? And then you leave. But that's more like putting bumpers up on a lane, and then the kid gets to the end goal, or what seems like the end goal because they find the answer, but they didn't actually learn anything in the process by making self-corrections and also listening to advice. And questioning, I think, is one of the best ways that I've found that you can guide without taking over. So it puts the responsibility back in the student's hands.
The bowling analogy is another one I'm going to steal, by the way. Caleb, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Absolutely.
For this video and sharing your classroom and your experiences. It was a wonderful experience for me. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully our viewers will learn a lot. Watch for our other videos in the series and find past videos at kindle.cc/exemplar videos. We'll see you next time.